Sam was a cowboy who had lived a life of solitude. He had known love once, deeply and passionately, but that was years ago. It was before the accident that stole her away, before the pain that made him promise to never love again. For Sam, the days were long and the nights felt even longer. His ranch was his only company now. The land stretched out before him like a vast ocean of dust and rocks, just as empty as his heart had become. He spent his days tending to the cattle, mending fences, and fixing the barn. There was always something to do, but the work never made him forget the ache that lingered. Sometimes when the wind would pick up and the sky turned a certain shade of pink, he would think of her, Sarah, his late wife. The memory of her smile would flash in his mind like a fleeting ghost, and for a moment he could almost feel her presence beside him again. But then the moment would pass and the harsh reality of his loneliness would return. Sam had loved Sarah with all his heart. They had met when he was young, just a boy really, with nothing but a horse and a dream. Sarah had been different from the women he had known before. She was strong, independent, and beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare. She had a smile that could light up a room and eyes that seemed to see right through him, straight to his soul. Sam had never believed in fate, but meeting her felt like it had been meant to be. They had spent years together on the ranch, building a life, raising cattle, and creating a home. Sam had never imagined that anything could tear them apart. But one fateful day it happened. A storm had come in, fierce and wild, and Sarah had gone to check on the animals in the barn. The wind had been so strong that it had knocked a tree over onto the roof, trapping her inside. By the time Sam had reached her, it was too late. She was gone. The pain had been unbearable. It was as if someone had ripped his heart out and left him with nothing but emptiness. Sam had tried to move on, but the truth was, he couldn't. He had promised himself that he would never love again, not because he didn't want to, but because the thought of losing someone else like he had lost Sarah was too much to bear. So he buried his feelings, locked them away in a box inside his heart, and lived his life as a shadow of the man he once was. The town knew Sam well. He was the quiet cowboy who kept to himself, never joining the social events or gatherings. He didn't need anyone, or so he told himself. People respected him for his strength, but there was always an air of sadness around him. The townsfolk would sometimes wonder what had happened to the lively man they had once known, but no one ever dared ask. Sam wasn't the type to talk about his past, and they all understood that. One evening, after another long day of work, Sam sat on the porch of his ranch house, staring out at the setting sun. The sky was a deep orange, and the air had a crispness to it that signaled the coming of fall. It was his favorite time of day, when everything was still and the world seemed to pause for just a moment. Sam took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs, and closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he let his mind wander, imagining what it would be like if things had turned out differently. If Sarah were still with him, what would they be doing right now? Would they still be working the land together? Would they have children running around the ranch, their laughter echoing through the hills? But as quickly as the thought came, Sam pushed it away. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Not anymore. It hurt too much. So he focused on the task at hand, the ranch. It was all he had now. The silence of the evening was suddenly broken by the sound of hooves in the distance. Sam's ears perked up and he stood up from his chair, squinting into the horizon. A rider was approaching, kicking up dust as they made their way down the long dirt road leading to his ranch. Sam's first instinct was to ignore them and go inside, but something made him hesitate. The rider wasn't turning away and they were getting closer. As the rider came into view, Sam's eyes narrowed. It was a woman and she was riding hard. Her horse was tired, and she looked like she had been traveling for days. Her clothes were worn and her face was streaked with dirt, but there was something about her that caught Sam's attention. She was determined, that was clear. But what was she doing out here in the middle of nowhere? The woman pulled her horse to a stop in front of Sam's porch. She looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and relief, her eyes wide as she took in the sight of the ranch. Sam didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't had a conversation with anyone other than the occasional grunt to a ranch hand in months. But something about this woman's presence felt different. She didn't seem afraid, and that intrigued him. "I'm sorry to trouble you," the woman said, her voice hoarse from the long ride, "but I'm in need of some help. My horse is about to drop and I can't make it to the next town. I was hoping you might have a place where I could rest for a bit." Sam looked at her for a long moment. His first instinct was to turn her away. He didn't want anyone here. Not now, not after everything he had been through. But as he looked at her, something about her plea stirred something inside him. Maybe it was the way she held herself. Or maybe it was just that he hadn't had anyone ask him for help in so long. Whatever it was, Sam found himself nodding before he even realized it. "You can stay in the guest room for the night," he said, his voice rough from years of disuse. "We'll get your horse settled and you can rest. But tomorrow you'll be on your way." The woman smiled faintly, grateful. "Thank you," she said, dismounting from her horse. "I'm Abigail." "Sam," he replied, turning and walking toward the barn without another word. Abigail followed behind him, keeping her distance. She was tired, but there was something about the man that made her want to understand him. He was a cowboy, no doubt about it, but there was something else about him, something hidden beneath the surface. She could tell he wasn't interested in conversation, but that wouldn't stop her. She had a feeling she'd be staying longer than just one night, and as Sam led her horse to the barn, he couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. He had promised never to love again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Abigail's arrival might change everything. The storm outside was relentless. The wind howled, battering the windows of Sam's ranch house, and the rain came down in sheets, turning the dirt road into a sea of mud. Sam had already prepared a space for Abigail in the guest room, but he hadn't said much to her since she arrived. He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, but he wasn't sure how to act around someone he didn't know. Abigail had made herself comfortable by the fire, drying off her clothes, while Sam worked on the horses in the barn. His mind was still spinning from the strange turn of events. He had spent so much time alone, and now here was a woman, a stranger, in his house. There was something about her presence that was different, though. She wasn't like the other women Sam had known in the past. She wasn't trying to make small talk or be overly polite. She was quiet, but there was a confidence about her, as though she didn't need to say much to make her presence known. When Sam finished tending to the horses, he returned to the house, his boots heavy with mud. He wiped his boots on the mat outside before stepping inside. The warmth from the fire wrapped around him, and he sighed. The barn had been cold and the rain wasn't letting up. Abigail looked up from the fire when she heard him enter. "Thank you again for letting me stay the night," she said, her voice soft but steady. She was sitting with her back to the fire, her wet hair now a bit drier, and she looked as though she'd finally found some comfort after a long day of travel. Sam gave a small nod, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to conversation, but he knew it was important to at least acknowledge her gratitude. "No problem," he replied gruffly. "Storm's bad. No one should be out in that." Abigail offered him a faint smile, and Sam felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. It wasn't much, just a small smile, but it was enough to make Sam pause for a moment. He didn't know why, but the sight of her sitting there looking exhausted yet strong made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. A pull, a curiosity. He had promised himself that he would never let anyone get close again. Yet here she was, and he couldn't quite figure out why he didn't want her to leave. "I was on my way to the next town," Abigail said, breaking the silence. "But the weather turned worse than I expected, and my horse can't go much further." Sam didn't respond immediately, but he was listening. She seemed like someone who didn't rely on others often, a woman who was used to handling things on her own. But he could also see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when she finally settled in for the night. "You traveling alone?" Sam asked before he could stop himself. Abigail's eyes met his for a moment, and Sam was struck by how direct she was. "I am," she replied simply. "I've been traveling for a while now, trying to find a place to settle." Sam felt a twinge of something in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as if there was more to her story than she was letting on. Something in her voice, in the way she spoke, made him wonder why someone like her was traveling alone, especially in such a dangerous time. But he didn't press her. He had learned over the years that some things were better left unsaid. The silence stretched between them for a moment before Sam spoke again. "What's your name?" "Abigail," she replied. "And you're Sam, right?" He nodded. "Sam Harper." "Well, Sam Harper," she said, standing up and dusting off her skirts. "You've got a nice place here. It's quiet." Sam looked around his ranch, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't much, just a small farmhouse and a barn. There were fields stretching out in every direction, but it wasn't the kind of place people sought out for its beauty. It was just a place to work, a place to survive. Still, he didn't want to sound rude. "It gets the job done," he said, shrugging. Abigail smiled at him, and for a moment the room seemed to brighten. There was something about her smile that made Sam's heart feel lighter, but he quickly pushed the thought away. He wasn't looking for company. He wasn't looking for anything, really. He had his work, his ranch, and that was all he needed. "I was going to ask if you wanted something to eat," Sam said, his tone more polite than usual. "I've got stew from earlier. It's not fancy, but it'll warm you up." Abigail didn't hesitate. "I'd love some, thank you," she said, sitting back down by the fire. "I've been eating whatever I can get my hands on, and I'm starving." Sam moved to the kitchen where the smell of stew still lingered in the air. As he ladled it into a bowl, he found himself thinking about Abigail again. She wasn't like other women he had known. There was no pretension, no desire to impress him or anyone else. She seemed comfortable in her own skin, which made Sam wonder what had brought her to this place. He returned to the sitting area, placing the bowl of stew on the table in front of her. She looked up at him and nodded her thanks. "Where are you headed after the storm clears?" Sam asked, trying to make small talk again. "Not sure yet," Abigail replied. "I've been trying to find a place to settle for a while now. A place where I can just live without running all the time." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Running from what?" Abigail paused for a moment, then looked him in the eye. "From everything," she said quietly. "Life, people. I guess I've just been trying to find something that feels like home. I haven't found it yet." Sam couldn't help but feel a bit of sympathy for her. He had spent years trying to escape his own past, running from the pain of losing Sarah. He understood what it felt like to be lost, to feel like there was no place for you in the world. "Well," Sam said, his voice softer than before, "you're welcome to stay here as long as you need to." Abigail looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Sam. I might just take you up on that." The words hung between them, unspoken but understood. Sam knew that he had just opened a door, and he wasn't sure what would come through it, but he didn't feel afraid. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, Abigail was the reason he hadn't given up completely. As the night wore on, the two of them sat in comfortable silence, sharing the warmth of the fire. Sam didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter was the start of something he couldn't have predicted, something that would change both of their lives forever. The rain continued to pour through the night, its rhythmic tapping on the windows creating a comforting sound that made the house feel cozier. The storm outside had become even fiercer, but inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet company made the night feel manageable. Sam didn't mind the storm so much, not now. The wind howled against the walls, but within the confines of the ranch house, there was a sense of peace, a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Abigail had retired to her room after their quiet supper, but Sam stayed by the fire. He stared into the flames, his thoughts drifting between memories of his wife, Sarah, and the strange, unsettling presence of Abigail. He wasn't sure what to make of her, or why he was so reluctant to let her go. It wasn't that he wanted to get close to her. He had promised himself he wouldn't do that again. But something about her, something in the way she looked at him, had started to chip away at the walls he had spent years building. Sam stood up and stretched, the quiet stillness in the house pressing on him. He couldn't remember the last time he had stayed up this late, let alone spent time with anyone. His life had become a series of solitary routines, and the occasional visit from townsfolk was as close as he ever came to human interaction. But Abigail wasn't like the others. She wasn't afraid of him. In fact, she seemed to have an energy about her that didn't make him feel so alone. He decided to check on the horses again before turning in for the night. The barn was always a good place to clear his head, and the animals were his only real companions. As he walked across the porch and toward the barn, the sound of hooves in the distance caught his attention. Sam froze for a moment, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver holstered at his side. It wasn't unusual for people to pass through this part of the country, but with the storm raging as it was, anyone out here was either lost or trouble. The hooves grew louder, and Sam's grip tightened on the gun. He stood still, waiting to see if the rider would approach his ranch or turn away. But the sound didn't stop. Instead, it grew closer. Sam's instincts kicked in, and he stepped quickly to the side of the barn, keeping out of sight. As the rider came into view, Sam saw that it wasn't just one person. It was a group. They were moving fast, their horses galloping through the storm with little care for the conditions. Sam's heart began to pound in his chest. He knew immediately that something wasn't right. These weren't travelers caught in the rain. They were too organized, too intent on their goal. Bandits. Sam had heard rumors about a group of outlaws that had been raiding small farms and ranches in the area. They'd come through once or twice before, but the sheriff had promised to handle it. Clearly, the sheriff had failed. Without hesitation, Sam sprinted back to the house, his boots splashing in the mud. He kicked open the door and shouted, "Abigail! Get up, we've got company!" Abigail had been asleep, but she jumped out of bed at the sound of Sam's urgent voice. "What's going on?" she asked, already moving toward the door. Her eyes were wide with alertness, not fear, and Sam couldn't help but admire how quickly she sprang into action. "There are bandits coming," Sam said, his voice tight. "Get to the barn. Get anything you can to defend yourself." Abigail nodded without a word and rushed toward the door. Sam grabbed his rifle from the corner and headed out after her. The wind made it hard to see, the rain pelting down so heavily that it felt like needles against his skin. But he didn't care. He had to protect the ranch, protect himself, and protect her. The barn was a few hundred yards from the house, and they moved quickly, staying low to the ground as much as they could. Sam had to admit it felt good to have someone with him again. It had been years since he had shared the weight of danger with anyone. Abigail might not have known much about guns or fighting, but she wasn't afraid. That much was clear. When they reached the barn, Sam quickly slid the door open, ushering Abigail inside. He grabbed a couple of pitchforks and handed one to her. "It's not much, but it'll do," he said, his voice rough. "Stay close." Abigail nodded and held the pitchfork tightly in her hands, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. Sam couldn't tell if she was nervous, but there was something in her stance that said she was ready to face whatever came. They didn't have to wait long. The sounds of hooves grew louder, and soon Sam could see the silhouettes of men on horseback moving fast and steady. They were almost at the ranch. Sam's mind raced, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. He knew that one wrong move could get them both killed. He turned to Abigail. "Stay low," he whispered. Abigail crouched down behind a stack of hay bales, her pitchfork raised in a defensive stance. Sam took a deep breath and slid the barn door closed, staying out of sight. He moved quickly but silently, preparing himself for the inevitable confrontation. The bandits approached the barn, their horses snorting as they slowed to a stop. Sam's pulse quickened. This was it. He had no choice but to fight back. He took a deep breath, then slowly crept around the back of the barn, positioning himself in a place where he could get a good shot. He raised his rifle and aimed for the leader of the group. He didn't have much time. If he didn't make his move now, they would be on him in seconds. Sam's hand tightened on the rifle. His breathing was steady, his heart pounding in his chest. He was ready. But just before he could pull the trigger, a sharp voice broke the silence. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Sam froze. The voice was familiar. It was Abigail. He turned quickly to see her standing up, her pitchfork held firmly in her hands, her eyes locked onto the bandits. "What the hell are you doing?" Sam hissed under his breath, moving toward her. "I'm not letting you do this alone," Abigail said, her voice steady. "They don't know who they're messing with." Sam looked at her, speechless. For a moment he was torn between anger and admiration. She was brave, maybe even reckless, but there was no denying that her presence was changing everything. He had never wanted to protect anyone again, but in that moment he realized he wanted to protect her. The bandits, clearly taken aback by her boldness, exchanged uneasy glances. But they didn't back down. One of them reached for his gun, and the tension in the barn was so thick it felt like it could snap at any moment. Sam and Abigail stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The storm raged outside, but in the barn, under the flickering light, something had shifted. Sam knew he wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in years, that didn't feel so bad. The tension in the barn was unbearable. Sam and Abigail stood facing the bandits, both of them ready to defend themselves. Though neither of them had much experience in a fight like this, Sam could feel the weight of the rifle in his hands, and Abigail, though nervous, gripped her pitchfork with surprising strength. She had no intention of backing down, and neither did Sam. The bandits hadn't moved yet, but the air around them seemed to crackle with anticipation. Sam knew that any hesitation could be their last. His eyes flicked to Abigail, and he saw the same determination in her eyes that had been there from the moment she first arrived. She wasn't scared. not in the way most people would be. She was strong, resourceful, and willing to face whatever came their way. Sam couldn't help but feel a swell of respect for her in that moment. The bandits hadn't expected such a strong reaction. They were used to easy pickings, to people who would either cower or try to negotiate their way out of trouble. But Abigail wasn't having any of that. She stood tall, not giving an inch, and Sam couldn't help but admire her bravery. He was used to being alone, to handling things on his own. But now, with Abigail by his side, he felt a strength he hadn't known in years. One of the bandits, the leader, finally spoke, his voice rough with a hint of irritation. "What's this, then? A couple of ranchers thinking they can stop us?" He laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. Sam's grip tightened on the rifle, but Abigail spoke before he could react. "You don't know who you're messing with," she said, her voice unwavering. "You think you can just take what you want, but you're wrong. We're not giving up without a fight." The leader's expression hardened, and he nodded to his men. Sam knew that this was it. They weren't going to back down, and neither were Sam and Abigail. The standoff had begun. Sam's mind raced. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The bandits were armed, and there were more of them than there were of him and Abigail. But they had the element of surprise. He could tell that they weren't expecting a woman to stand up to them, let alone one with the fire that Abigail had shown. That gave Sam a small advantage, but he knew it wouldn't be enough if things turned violent. "Get back on your horses and leave now," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "You're not welcome here. This is your only warning." The bandits exchanged glances, sizing up Sam and Abigail. Sam could see the hesitation in their eyes. They had been expecting easy prey, but the two of them were not what they had anticipated. Abigail, despite holding only a pitchfork, had an air of confidence that made it clear she wasn't afraid of them. And Sam, with the rifle in his hand, stood like a wall ready to protect what was his. But the leader of the bandits wasn't going to let it end that easily. "We're not leaving without what we came for," he sneered. "We'll take what we want, whether you like it or not." With that, one of the bandits reached for his gun, and Sam knew there wasn't any time to waste. He moved quickly, the rifle already aimed, but Abigail was faster. In one swift motion, she thrust the pitchfork forward, aiming for the bandit's chest. He staggered back, surprised by her sudden move. But it wasn't enough to stop him. The bandit fired his gun, and the sound of the shot rang in the barn, echoing off the wooden walls. Sam's heart skipped a beat, but the bullet missed them by a wide margin. The bandit cursed and tried to take another shot, but Sam fired first. The shot was precise, and the bandit dropped to the ground, the gun slipping from his hand. Abigail stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide as she looked at the fallen bandit. She had never been in a fight like this before, but the danger was far from over. The remaining bandits were furious now, and they weren't backing down. Sam motioned for Abigail to move to the side. "Get out of the line of fire," he said urgently. "I'll handle the rest," but Abigail shook her head. "I'm not leaving you alone to deal with this," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're in this together." For a moment, Sam didn't know what to say. He had never expected to have someone by his side in a fight like this. But as he looked at Abigail, something inside him shifted. She was no longer just a stranger he had taken in. She was someone who was willing to fight alongside him, someone who cared enough to protect what mattered. Another bandit lunged forward, swinging a knife at Sam. He barely managed to dodge, the blade grazing his arm. He winced in pain, but there was no time to think about it. With a quick motion, Sam slammed the butt of his rifle into the bandit's chest, sending him crashing into the nearby hay bales. The bandit struggled to get back up, but Sam didn't wait. He moved to the next, his rifle raised and ready. Abigail was right behind him, pitching the fork at another bandit who had tried to sneak up on them from the side. The pitchfork pierced his leg, and he howled in pain, stumbling back. Sam shot another bandit in the leg, sending him tumbling to the ground. The remaining bandits, now outnumbered, started to retreat. They had come for a fight, but now they realized they weren't going to win. The leader, seeing the situation turning against them, barked an order. "Fall back!" he shouted. "We're not getting paid enough for this." The bandits, wounded and panicked, mounted their horses and fled into the night. Sam and Abigail watched them disappear into the storm, their horses kicking up mud as they sped away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The adrenaline was still pumping through Sam's veins, and he could feel his heart racing. The storm outside seemed to have quieted just as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Abigail was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. Did we do it? Sam nodded, breathing heavily. Yeah, we did. We stopped them. But even as the words left his mouth, Sam knew that things had changed. They had fought together, and in that moment he had felt something shift between them. It wasn't just about survival anymore. There was a bond forming between them, one that neither of them had expected. Abigail stepped closer to Sam, her face serious. Are you okay? Sam looked down at his arm where the knife had grazed him. The wound wasn't deep, but it stung. I'll be fine, he said with a small smile. You? Abigail nodded, her expression softening. I'm all right, just didn't expect it to get so intense. Sam chuckled, though it was a tired sound. Neither did I, but we made it. And for the first time in years, Sam realized that he hadn't done it alone. He hadn't had to. Abigail had been right there with him, fighting side by side. And in that moment, he knew that things would never be the same again. The sun had just begun to rise the following morning, casting a soft golden light over the ranch. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and cool, and the sky now stretched wide and clear above. Sam stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The night's events seemed almost unreal now, like something out of a dream. But the remnants of the fight were still fresh in his mind. The bandits, the fear, and most of all, the way Abigail had stood beside him. Fearless and unwavering. Sam had expected the adrenaline to wear off quickly, but it hadn't. It lingered in his bones. And though he was exhausted, he felt strangely alive. It was as if something had been awakened in him. Something he had buried deep inside for years. He had promised himself that he would never love again, never let anyone get close enough to hurt him. But Abigail had broken through that wall, and he couldn't deny it any longer. There was something about her that made him feel whole again. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, her footsteps light but purposeful. She walked over to Sam, her face softening as she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Despite everything that had happened, she looked calm, almost serene, as if she had accepted something she hadn't expected. Morning, she said, her voice quiet but steady. She was wearing a simple shirt and pants, her hair still slightly damp from the rain, but she looked more herself than she had the night before. She had been shaken, of course, but she had handled the situation with a strength that surprised even Sam. Morning, Sam replied, turning to face her. He smiled, though it was a small one. You sleep okay? Abigail nodded. Yeah, I did. I didn't expect to, but I guess I felt safe here. I haven't felt that in a long time. The words hit Sam harder than he expected. He hadn't realized how much Abigail had needed that sense of safety, just as much as he had needed her presence the night before. It made him realize how isolated they both were, how two people who had suffered so much had found some sort of solace in each other's company. I'm glad you're okay, Sam said, his voice softer than usual. He wasn't one to express his feelings easily, but with Abigail it just seemed natural. She smiled faintly, looking down at the ground for a moment. I'm glad you're okay too. We made a good team last night. Sam chuckled, though it was a little strained. Yeah, we did. Don't think I'd have made it out there without you. Abigail raised an eyebrow. You wouldn't have made it out of that barn without me. Don't be modest. Sam shook his head, smiling at her teasing tone. She was right, of course. She had been there side by side with him, and together, they had made it through the worst. It was a strange feeling, being vulnerable with someone, trusting them in a way he hadn't trusted anyone in years. But as much as Sam tried to dismiss it, he knew deep down that something had shifted between them. He couldn't just push it away, not anymore. The bond they had formed during the fight, the way they had relied on each other, was something real. It wasn't just about survival. It was about something more, something Sam wasn't sure he was ready to confront. I've been thinking, Abigail said, breaking the silence. Maybe I should head out after breakfast. I don't want to overstay my welcome. The word stung more than Sam had expected. The idea of her leaving already felt wrong, though he didn't know how to explain it. She had only been here for a short time, but already, she had become a part of his life in ways he couldn't describe. Are you sure? Sam asked, his voice surprisingly uncertain. You don't have to leave. I mean, it's a big world out there, but it's not like I'm going anywhere anytime soon. Abigail paused, studying him carefully. She seemed to weigh his words before responding. I'm not sure where I'm headed next, but I don't know if I can stay here forever either. You've been kind to me, Sam, but you're right about one thing. I've been running for a long time. Sam didn't know how to respond. He hadn't expected her to leave, and yet, the idea of her staying indefinitely had its own challenges. He had spent so long alone, convinced that it was the only way to keep from getting hurt again. But Abigail wasn't like anyone else. She had come into his life so unexpectedly, and yet, she felt like someone he had always known. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," Sam said quietly. "But if you wanted to stay for a while, there's no reason you couldn't. I could use the company." Abigail looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I might just take you up on that. But you need to understand, Sam. I'm not running from just the storm or the bandits. I've been running from myself. From everything that happened in the past." Sam understood that more than she could know. He had been running from his own grief, his own memories, and his own broken heart for years. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face them yet, but he knew that being with Abigail, whether for a short while or longer, had already started to change something inside him. "I get it," Sam said, his voice calm. "I've been running too, but maybe we don't have to do it alone anymore." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if the two of them had reached an unspoken understanding, a shared realization that they didn't have to face the world alone. They both carried their pain, their pasts, but maybe together, they could begin to heal. Abigail nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. "Maybe," she said finally, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Maybe we can help each other." Sam returned the smile, though his heart still felt uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like that uncertainty was okay. He didn't have to have all the answers, didn't have to figure everything out right away. For the first time in years, he felt like he didn't have to face the world alone, and that in itself was enough. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Sam and Abigail stood together on the porch, their shadows stretching long across the land. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Sam wasn't afraid of it. And for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. "Let's see what happens next," Sam said, his voice steady. "We can figure it out together." Abigail smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I think that sounds like a good plan." And for the first time, Sam believed that maybe, just maybe, there was a future worth fighting for. One that didn't have to be faced alone.